Minnesota Governor's Task Force meeting on broadband. I'm going to call this meeting to order. I want to thank everybody for attending and joining us for the first meeting. Pretty exciting. We've got, we're all refreshed and ready for another year and ready to go. Lots of good things have happened in broadband over the last couple of weeks. We'll hear from several people here today that can give us an update on that. And I'm excited for the discussion and then a little bit of kind of how we organize ourselves for this year. Specifically to this meeting, we'll start out here with just a roll call. How Carol help us kind of do a roll call here, and then maybe because there's different people as we go through, you could as Carol calls your name, just say here and then who you were with, the task force members. And then we'll move from there. We'll approve the minutes from December 3rd, 10:10, and after the about 8 minutes or so, we'll have the Deed Commissioner Steve Grove join us for an update from his perspective, and a lot has been happening there, so it'll be exciting to hear from him. From 10:30 to 10:45, Devin Bowdry will be on and sort of give us an update on as he usually does at this time of the year, on the 2022 sessions and sort of some of the discussions and the developments there. 10:45 to 11, Anna Boroff is here, and she'll give us an update regarding a legislative bill update for the Minnesota Cable Communications Association. We'll take a break from there. We'll kind of see how it goes. Then Angie will do an update on the Office of Broadband Development and some of the latest there. And really that should take us to about 11:30 or so. And from there, we'll have a little bit of discussion on sort of thoughts from how things went last year, subgroups, reports, things like that. Kind of some thoughts maybe for this following year and maybe some suggestions. Talk a little bit about, what the topics that we should cover this year should be. Not quite break them up into subgroups yet, but just sort of what are some of the things we might want to tackle. And then we'll close the day. Looks like the meeting will, at least for now, we've got a plan till 1 o'clock or so. With some closing comments. If we end early, that's fine. I know we usually tend to finish around 12:30 or so, but we'll kind of see how it goes and see how the discussion progresses, and we'll do it that way. So with that, Carol, maybe I'll turn it over to you, and you can kind of do a roll call for us.
Sounds good. Okay. Well, Teddy Backelli.
Well, I'm here, and I'm the chair of the task force and also chief technology officer at Land O'Lakes.
Yvonne Caribou. Nolan Coffin. Steve Fensky.
Good morning.
Hear you. Steve Giorgi.
Present.
Jason Hollanday, he may be able to join later, so we'll wait for him. Mark Johnson.
Good morning, Mark Johnson. I'm the executive director of ECMEC, a K-12 school district consortium.
I'm here. Bernadine Jocelyn.
Good morning. I'm joining from Grand Rapids, Minnesota, where I work as the director of Blandin Foundation's Public Policy and Engagement Team.
Thank you. I can hear you. Yvonne Caribou, I think you just joined.
Yes, hello.
Brian Crambier.
Good morning. Brian Crambier, President and CEO of My Energy Cooperative, a rural electric co-op in beautiful southeastern Minnesota.
Thank you. Micah Myers.
Here, Micah Myers, Director IT Services, City of St. Cloud.
Thank you. Teresa Sunday.
I'm here. I am Teresa Sunday. I work for the ISP MediaCom. I'm the Senior Manager of Government Relations, and I'm based in Waseca, Minnesota.
Thank you. James Wycombe.
Good morning. Jim Wycombe. I'm the Executive Director of the Arrowhead Library System, one of Minnesota's 12 regional library systems, and I also have the privilege of being the mayor of the city of Hiawatha.
Thank you. Paul Wirtz.
Good morning, Paul Wirtz. I'm the state president for AT&T Minnesota and Wisconsin, and I've been on the task force since 2015.
Thank you. And David Woltz. David Wolf. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so it sounds like we're missing David Wolf, so we'll look out for him, and Nolan Calvin, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, well, thanks everybody, and thanks for those brief introductions. I think that's good to just kind of get going again. So the first agenda item today is really to approve the minutes from December 3rd. Those were included in the meeting invitation that Carol sent out. If you had a chance to look at those minutes, any questions, comments, concerns at this point in time before we pass those minutes and make them publicly available? Okay, I don't hear any, so we'll consider the meeting that's approved. So with that, I know we're running maybe a couple minutes early. I do see Commissioner Grove has joined. So Commissioner, if you're okay with that, I will turn it over to you for some updates.
Thanks, Teddy. Good to see you all. Happy Wednesday. Hope you're all digging out of the snow. And thanks for letting me swing by to the task force. Just really want to begin by thanking you all for serving on the task force. This is an incredibly important body. We're thrilled and honored that Teddy is leading it and that you all are participating and are putting together really the roadmap for where our state needs to head in broadband. And the task force report last year was great to read. Really appreciate the work that went into it and just the scope of issues and the holistic view you're taking of this topic, from affordability to mapping to access and to really the need to finish the job, if you will, is just really smart and thoughtful and something that we really reference at DEED in conversations with stakeholders across the state. And we know you're doing this on a voluntary basis and that you care about it because it matters to you. And we're just grateful that you're serving on the task force and that you are bringing your leadership to this moment. And it is a moment, I think. I think we all feel that. This is a moment for broadband unlike any we've seen, certainly in my time here in this office and probably in the existence of the program as a whole. The pandemic, of course, woke up everyone to how important broadband is for our state across health and economic development and education. And so the governor is very eager to lean forward heavily on broadband, as you've seen, I hope, in his budget recommendation for this legislative session. It's just one of those unique moments where society faces these like huge existential, important challenges, and we also happen to have a huge amount of resources to devote to them. The surplus is just a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make smart investments that can change the trajectory of our state. And I know I'm preaching to the choir on that, but it bears being said as we begin this meeting because of how important it is for our state's future. We're very fortunate for Angie and her team in the broadband office and the work they do to get money out the door and to support. With you, I wanted to just, if I could, begin by just sharing a couple of slides from the governor's budget just to highlight a few of the priorities that are in his proposed vision for we take our state into this group here. I think some of you have been in other convenings we've had on the governor's budget, so apologies if this is repetitive to some of you, but there are a few things that I think are worth just teeing up as this team begins this year in 2022, because you've really successfully advocated for the governor focusing on some of these areas that are so critical. And we know that the next step, of course, is advocating that legislators agree. So Uget, my colleague, I think is going to pull up a couple of slides just as a little bit of a visual aid, but I'll be brief on the slides, and I'm more curious just to have a conversation with all of you about these components. The first one that will go, and I'll just start as we're pulling those up, but is, of course, the broadband money. And the dollars that the governor's put forward, as you well know, are $170 million. We did a pretty extensive analysis based on your recommendations, based on Angie and her team's look at what it would take to finish the job. And we think about $1.3 billion is what's needed to land broadband in our state overall to meet those goals and to have full penetration. And the needed contribution from the state is about $170 million. So we need about $170 million from the state to get on a pathway that would result with $170 million in full penetration. So it's a lot of money, but of course with a $7.75 billion surplus, it's all relative, I suppose. And it's one of the biggest and most important economic development and just really sort of infrastructure investments the governor's making in his budget. So it's a big one. We know there's about 260 some odd thousand homes in the state that are not connected at all. And we would like to be among the first in the nation to finish the job. So I think Angie's pulling up the slides. I think we had a couple of technical issues, but this is a topic you know well, and I just wanted to start there and just affirm the governor's commitment on this and anything you can do to raise this with legislators. Again, it's not a particularly partisan issue, of course, but there's always trade-offs. So that's a big component of this budget. We wanted to talk a little further just about a couple of other pieces that are kind of related to what broadband can do in our economy that are in our budget that I thought just would be good to get on your radar. The first is on sort of small business development and what you do once broadband meets a community. And so wanted to highlight our efforts on growing small business and attracting talent to this state. In particular, we are really honing in on making Minnesota's advantage for a place to start companies that will build the jobs of the future really solidified. And we're not taking anything for granted here. We have a great state for business. The numbers all bear that out. But if government's not playing a really proactive role here, things can shift. And so we are really bullish on bringing back the Launch Minnesota program at an expanded scope, an additional $5 million to help high-tech startups grow in our state. And these additional dollars will be focused particularly on companies that come here to scale up. So when you've got good broadband connections, when you've got high talent market, you can get startups to move to your state because they want to take advantage of the talent and infrastructure that's here to take that business to the next level and become the next Fortune 500. This is a trend that is actually, I think, important for Minnesota in particular, given the dynamics in our economy here. So if you go to that next slide, Angie, you'll see just a view into this. This is an idea here to scale up high-tech startups in early stage by making grants to organizations that accelerate their growth and make the kind of connections that really provide a warm welcome and a fast growth path to startups that come here. The next one, if you go to slide 12, Angie, is the Angel Tax Credit. You all know this well. This is a tax credit program that encourages venture capital to come into the state. Again, when they know they have a strong broadband connection, when they know they have great talent in our state, venture capitalists will invest. And this program has again and again, year over year, provided huge leverage for our state startups. And it's a program that we have to fight for every legislative session because it's not in that base budget. It's not a sort of always-on program, which provides a lot of inconsistency and uncertainty. The same kind of inconsistency and uncertainty that broadband providers tell us they need with our broadband program to be fixed. So that's something we want to do for the tax credit too, to get that into the base budget and be an always-on tool for our venture community and for our startups too, to make that money flow and create those jobs that we need in our state. So those are two on the small business front. There are a couple of other programs on the workforce front that I wanted to highlight as well because they relate to technology jobs, which is again, I think, at the heart of what broadband tries to empower. We have two workforce programs focused on technology jobs that we're excited about. And I'll say just to start that the reason we're even focused on tech jobs is this is where our economy is growing. If you go to slide, I want to say 25 here. Sorry, here we go. These jobs have huge growth rates and they pay really great wages. I mean, tech jobs pay more than your typical job and they're growing, if you go to the next slide, twice as fast as any other job in the state. So this is where the jobs are growing. You can see the numbers here. There's 6,000 open jobs in this field today, 35,000 in the next decade. This is where the economy is going, but our pipeline's in trouble. When you look at our high schools, when you look at young people, when you look at the youth job tech pipeline in particular, if you go to the next slide, you'll see we rank dead last in the country, dead last in the number of high school students who take the AP Computer Science examination. That's but one indicator, but it's a pretty troubling one. And if we don't get young people focused on computer science and just on technology opportunities in general, we risk not having the workforce that our future companies need. You can build all the broadband you want, but if companies don't have the workers they need and the opportunity they need, that growth isn't possible. So this $15 million program would focus on really enhancing that tech jobs pipeline for young people. And then similarly, we know so many adults and those in the middle of their career at other stages are reevaluating their entire future based on the effects of the last 2 years. And COVID has, of course, given everybody that moment to step back and say, what's a good job? You know, what's a good opportunity for my family and I that is going to sustain us into the future? And technology jobs are becoming more and more attractive at all levels, by the way, not just college degree level computer science related jobs, but software, IT, customer service. So this workforce program would help leaders in technology or those who want to become leaders in technology transition fields. And this reskilling need, this desire to make sure we have that workforce we need in tech is really critical. So these two programs, 15 million, 13 million, again, not big in the larger picture of a $7.75 billion surplus, but could be game changing for how we do workforce training in our state. And then the last one I wanted to highlight is tech related as well, is just clean tech. We know that the green jobs revolution is here. The climate change is real, and I think everybody in the last 12 to 18 months in particular has realized this is a huge economic opportunity for states to get ahead of it. We need to train the workers that can empower these clean tech firms to grow. So programs to help train workers to do everything from solar panel installation to weatherizing buildings could really get us on a great pathway to growing green jobs in our state with an investment that we're suggesting we make alongside the Commerce Department. So we're excited about some of these. I won't go into the whole budget. There's lots in it. This isn't a budget pitch per se, but there are so many components of what we're trying to do in this budget that we think are kind of related to the work of this task force and related to broadband. And I guess maybe the last one I'd mention, and it isn't, I don't think, in the slides here, is just promoting our state. We think that this moment in Minnesota's history is one in which we really need to be telling our story aggressively alongside other states who spend a lot of money on marketing their states as destinations. If you can go out there and land broadband and say, this is a state that's connected across the state, you can live anywhere and telecommute or work for whatever kind of company you'd like and succeed, that's a great message. And we need to be more forceful and aggressive in telling that message. If you go to joinsmn.com, which is a website we've launched to really tell the Minnesota story to talent and businesses across the country, you'll see a completely reimagined platform for how we talk about Minnesota. And it's an important platform, but without marketing dollars to actually drive traffic to it, you don't have that opportunity to tell the story and reach your audience. So we're asking for about $5 million in marketing dollars there too, just to tell that story that broadband can help really strengthen. So I'll stop there. I know that's a bit of an earful. We can pass these slides around afterwards, but Teddy, just wanted to kind of tee up some of these things that I think are relevant to the group. And again, chief amongst them, broadband. So I'd be curious for questions from the task force or others just on anything related to the governor's budget or this broadband item in particular, because it's going to take some advocacy to get done, and we're going to need, I think, everyone pulling together to make it happen.
Absolutely, and thank you, Commissioner Grove, for taking the time and being here, and even going through the numbers here. So for everyone in the task force, if you have a question, either please raise the hand of Teams, or if you need to come off mute, we'll be doing that. But Steve, I see you have your hand up, so I'll turn it over to you for a first question.
June.
Shut up.
Commissioner Grove, thank you for joining us and sharing some of this information. I'm just curious, we know, as part of the task force, the goal for the state of Minnesota is 2022 is the 25.3, and it's likely we're not going to achieve that goal. And then in 26, it's 100 down, 20 up. But as you mentioned with the angel tax credit, without base funding, it's always a challenge with the legislature to keep these programs sustained. So, appreciate that the governor is indicating $170 million of investment, but if it's a one-time investment, it's not going to help us achieve the goal. Why won't he, or why doesn't he want to pursue that base funding?
Thanks, Steve. And
that's what we recommend.
Yeah, I know, and I really appreciate that. I think I don't have the numbers in front of me on how this trickles out over the biennium and in the tails, but I believe there is a component of that there. But I agree. I guess we looked at this as like, we know that especially with ARPA, these are literally one-time funds, and so if we can front load it heavily to a level that we think the program could sustain, in other words, that the grants would actually be able to be gobbled up and used during that period of time, then we feel confident this is the right type of investment. I think the future of what a always-on program looks like is an important one to ask. And we also know that the infrastructure dollars are also on the horizon too, which provides some of that longer tail money that would go into the future. So we're trying to kind of situate this between federal programs and state programs and what the dollars are restricted to do and are not. But Angie can speak much more eloquently to this than I can, so maybe I'll turn it to you, Angie, to address this, because it is an important point. We've heard it from you again and again, and we know that kind of consistency is what companies need. Angie, you want to add to that? Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act money on the horizon, I think we really need to take a look at how that's going to impact our state. And I'll go into deeper discussion during my presentation. But certainly we know Minnesota is going to get at least $100 million out of that funding. And once the FCC updates their mapping, we'll have a better idea of just exactly how much that will be. So it's a good opportunity to balance the state monies that we have now with the funding that we know is available now and the anticipated funding on the horizon. Commissioner, I'll turn it back to you.
Other questions or comments for the commissioner? I'm not seeing any hands, Commissioner, but the one thing, just to clarify, I think in the budget, the 170 million, I think there was a question in the chat or some discussion there. It is an addition of the 70 million that's been approved to the capital fund project. It also is an addition to the dollars that are coming from the infrastructure bill that was passed as well. So this really is a way to say, like, let's get the job done, right? And kind of like, what was the thinking behind that, Commissioner? Like, what was thinking, like, what were, I know that we need to get the job done, et cetera, but and you mentioned the jobs piece of it, right? Like, in some of the things we're trying to do, but something must have sparked that interest, right? So what was the spark there?
Well, the governor asked us, having read the task force report and looked at a bunch of advice he was getting from business leaders and stakeholders across the state to think big. I mean, and we're very lucky for that. I mean, he didn't, when you have this kind of a surplus and you have this sort of moment, even before we knew the size of the surplus, given the ARPA funding we had there, you can do a bunch of little things and trickle them all over, but does that make the kind of impact our state needs? And there are a lot of big ideas in this budget process that I can tell you internally that didn't make it, right? I mean, a lot of folks put forward big ideas on how to use money to do a whole host of things the state needs. And, ultimately there are limits, and the governor has to present a balanced budget that meets the needs of those numbers. And broadband just remained on the radar as something he really, really didn't want to let go of. And we really pushed our team internally to get that analysis done, to your point, Teddy, to look at that CPF funding, to look at the IIJA funding, to look at the RDOF funding map. And I know Angie has a great sort of 2-pager on this that she'll circulate after. She's kind of done the math for all of us, which is really helpful just to really map out what this looks like, because it is kind of complex with all these funding sources, to make sure that we weren't asking for state money that would have eventually, could have just been federal money. But also we had a sense of urgency going in. So I would just credit the governor and all of you for pushing him on it. Like, he just continued to come back to broadband as something he felt like was a way to think big at this unique moment. And there were conversations about, can we do 100, or what if we did 80? He's like, no, if 170 is the number, we're going to do 170. And so I give the credit to him on that, and to all of you for pushing him on it, because your report was really forceful on this. He had a council of economic advisors last fall that really pushed this as well. So, I think you've made the case, and I'm just grateful that you have.
Well, that's exciting to hear, and we really appreciate your support as well throughout the process, because I know you're a big advocate as well. Bernadine, I think you have a question.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you so much for being here today. I know that you're aware, as is your whole team, and also Broadband about the bellyaches and headaches that the RDOF award has brought to our rural communities. And a number of places, they're still really struggling to try to figure out what steps are available to them, while the deed position is saying, if we don't have an encumbered relationship, it's still unenforceable. I'm just wondering if you have any advice to our community champions out there that are being stuck in the RDOF quagmire right now, while our providers are waiting approval from FCC.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, we continue to work on this with the Office of Broadband Development. We know that federal dollars can be more challenging and slower to get, and we're sympathetic to that. And we're trying to be as smart and efficient with our dollars as we possibly can. And so, we hold all of our partners to a high standard of making sure they can get those houses connected through the technologies they deploy. And I know the federal government has the same intent, but it does take longer, and we understand there's arguments of good faith on both sides of whether or not some of those overlapping, geographical restrictions that we've discussed, make sense or not. But, we are following the federal guidance on CPF related to RDOF. So we're looking very closely what the federal government's telling us through these CPF funds as it relates to where the RDOF program is going. And beyond that, I think Angie's probably in a better position to get into some of the details of this. But we hear you. We're listening. We're trying to juggle a lot of priorities here to make sure we can ultimately just keep our ultimate customer in mind, which is the citizen of Minnesota, and get as many houses connected as fast as we can with the resources available. But appreciate that there's differing opinions on the specifics of how to get that done.
Okay. Again, if you have more questions, please feel free to raise the hand. Commissioner, as you think of, as we approach now getting into 2022, and we're going to get together again here and we'll have some initial discussions on topics for this year, et cetera. Are there things that you suggest or things you'd want for us to look into, right? Or things that you would want to know more, get more data points on as we go forward?
Yeah, thanks, Teddy. And I think, you hit on so many issues in your report last fall that are so critical. I'd say a couple come to mind that we're really focused in on. One is just making sure that when broadband hits, how we're making sure that we're positioning communities to take advantage of it as quickly as possible, and to, especially in greater Minnesota, really transform and advance their rural economies with these dollars. So any focus on economic development, especially rural economic development that comes in broadband, and your advice on that front, we would welcome. And the second is just digital equity. Angie has convened a group of leaders across state government internally to focus on this in particular, given there's just pretty stunning issues around access to broadband and technology as it relates to our equity and our efforts around equity. So that's an area where I think this group will have some thoughts as well that we would love to hear. This is something the Biden administration has pushed forward too, with some of their dollars that are coming through CPF and other funding sources. So those two come to mind sort of right away as broad components. And I think, let's see where we get this session with this money. I don't want to lose sight of the grant program and the need to advocate for dollars and penetration and mapping and all those things. And we're starting to ask ourselves the question, okay, if you can start to see a point in the future in which we start to meet some of these goals, which we are bullish on doing, and again, are going to not take our eye off the ball on that, what are the longer term issues, 100 down, 20 up world, if you will? And it's never too early to start thinking about that. So what you would want to see from government in the next 10 years would be an interesting, I'd love to kind of hear your answers on questions to that topic, because we know that we should always play a role in broadband, and we're going to keep our heads to the grindstone, or shoulders to the grindstone, is that the expression, on getting this done. But then, what is the state's role in broadband beyond there? I mean, of course, there's cost concerns and there's regulation that is always debated and things like that. But from an economic development standpoint, where would you like to see us 10 years from now? Would be an interesting, I think, topic to hear from you on.
Well, that's really good, and actually that ties into kind of Steve's question at the beginning on a base budget. Like, if we can paint the picture of what the future looks like, then you can make the case for a base budget and why that's there, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I think we're right at time. Again, we want to thank you for taking the time to be here, answer the questions, being candid with them, and really appreciate your support through all of this as well. I think you've been a big advocate for this, and it really is rewarding to see some of it kind of pay off with some of the things that are coming forward. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Teddy. Thanks. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you, and have a great meeting today. Talk to you soon.
All right, take care. Thank you. Okay, so moving on, we're right on schedule for the moment. Next piece is really on an update on the 2022 legislative session. Devin, I believe I saw you on. I will turn it over to you to give us a bit of an update of what's happening.
Perfect. Thank you, Teddy. And I'm going to go really quick because I just got that pop-up that my computer is going to restart, and it won't let me snooze it. So I've got precisely 12 minutes. And then I'll try and hop back on if there are questions. But so far in the session, Angie has presented twice in the House, once in the Industrial Ed Committee, the committee that has jurisdiction over broadband funding, and then once in capital investment. Still haven't quite figured out what the angle was for that other than the CPF fund. And then today she'll be presenting in Senate Ag, giving another overview. The common theme really between all three of those committees has been just lawmakers trying to grapple with and get their minds around all these different pots of funding. It's definitely confusing if you don't see this every day. So Angie's done a great job kind of carving out, what are things that the state's applying for, what are things that providers apply for directly, and how this all fits into the ask that Commissioner Grove just laid out, the $170 million. And another question that has come up quite a bit is, trying to figure out why there was not a grant round last fall. So it's really been sort of making the case for why state funds are needed, and it's wonderful to have all this additional federal money, but as we've learned, there are just additional layers to go through there, in accessing it, getting a plan put together, things like that. So as you saw, Commissioner Grove has the 170 from the general fund. That's his ask. But to Brian's question earlier, that is completely separate from the 70, so it'll be an additional. And that leaves 110 million remaining from the capital project fund of the 180 total. The governor has authority to spend that, and he's sort of diving into different ways to use that money. No final decisions there yet. And then, of course, looking at the infrastructure bill, the BEAD money. So next steps right now, it sounds like the House is going to amend House File 14 once they figure out the final dollar amount that they would like to proceed with. And then the Senate is going to use this afternoon's hearing to sort of plan their next steps. I haven't heard kind of a ballpark of what they might be thinking yet, but hoping to know more after today.
Thank you, Devin. Any questions for Devin on the update? All right, I'm not hearing any, Devin. No, you were right on time.
I'm gonna jump off. If there are more questions, feel free to reach out to me. Happy to answer.
Sure, we can do that. And also during Angie's session, we can reconvene and ask more questions if we need to there. Perfect. Thank you. Moving right along. I know we're running a bit ahead of schedule, but I did see Anna on earlier. Anna, hopefully you're still on. And I know you wanted to do a quick presentation on the legislative bill that was presented by the Minnesota Cable Communications Association.
Yeah, I'm here and I'm happy to go now. So I'm just going to share a couple of slides here. And for those of you who I don't know, I think I know most of you, but I'm Anna Boroff. I'm the Executive Director of Minnesota Cable, which is cable broadband providers across the state. And I have Tony Mendoza on the line too, who drafted this bill. So he's available to answer any of the task force members' questions as well. So thank you for letting me present about an idea we had, or I guess I should say an idea that we stole from another state. Regarding about how we make sure that we don't leave anyone behind in terms of broadband service. So can you guys see my slides? You're good?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I just have a couple slides. This first one is just the bare bones of what the first section of this bill does. It's House File 3605. It's being carried by Representative Jordan Rasmussen, and the second author is Representative Rob Eklund. So both obviously who are from rural districts, and we have been adding a lot of co-authors this week from both parties, both rural and suburban. So that's been exciting, and it's been exciting to hear how happy legislators are about this bill. So, and then on the Senate side, the author is Senator Mark Johnson from Thief River Falls area. And then we have Senator Westrom, Senator Rosen, Senator Howe, and Senator Friends on the bill. So it's bipartisan in the Senate too. And I think that will probably get introduced tomorrow. So here's what the bill does. And at the end, I'm happy to take feedback, questions, like I said, Tony or myself. It establishes a broadband line extension program. And so the Office of Broadband would create a portal like, a consumer could go in and enter in their name and address and information where they could report that they don't have service. And so every 6 months, the Office of Broadband would compile this list of addresses. Those would be made available to broadband providers. We would make sure that, these households don't already have service. And then providers of any sort, it could be a cable company, it could be a co-op, it could be a telephone provider, we could bid on extending service. So the lowest bid would win. So this is a little bit different than our border-to-border process in that this is a consumer-driven process. Right now, it's kind of incumbent on providers to come in and tell communities this is where we're thinking about investing. what legislators have really liked about this is that, like I said, it's consumer driven. You know, we're frequently contacted by the Office of Broadband or local governments or legislators about situations just like the bill would try to address. And so, you know, we tried to give the possible in this bill. There's a $25,000 cap per extension. I should mention that. That was a number that's sort of arbitrary, but we thought it would cover most of what we're seeing in the field. And like I said, the lowest bid would then win. They would have a year to extend service, so this would be a pretty quick process. And there is some flexibility in language in the bill too about making sure that it's a cost-effective use of state resources. So here's kind of like the practical way of how this would work. We know, because we hear from you all and from others, that sometimes households go on the broadband maps and they show up on the map as served, but they don't have service. So these addresses might be serviceable, for example, but they might require significant investment from a homeowner to extend infrastructure. So they might have a mile-long driveway. Maybe they're at the end of a road and the fiber only goes part of the way down the road, and they would need an extension from nearby plants. So you know, they might have reached out to their provider and, you know, we could have given a quote and then, you know, maybe it's $10,000 to extend them service. Well, a lot of households just can't financially make that work. So the other, you know, challenge that we're trying to solve with this bill is the state and federal programs are great. You know, Angie and her team have done a fabulous job with our border-to-border program, but we're not going to do a border-to-border application for 1 to 2 households, right? That's just not feasible. And so this would be sort of a complement to the border-to-border program that would get to these 1, 2, 3 household situations. And so without something like this to reach these locations, the concern was that we're leaving some of these Minnesotans unconnected, even if we get to our goal, you know, of connecting the vast majority of the state. So that's like the really quick version of what the first section of that bill does. I will say this, there are 2 sections to this bill. You guys have heard about the second article before. Last year, there was a bill that allowed electric co-ops to who hold private easements to be able to use those same easements for broadband service. This will stay in providers. So hopefully that's not controversial this session. Hopefully we can sort of resolve that issue. I haven't gotten pushback from the co-ops or anything on that section of the bill. So I just wanted to make sure that folks knew there. With that, maybe I will stop there, and then if you guys have questions or feedback, I would be happy to answer.
Any questions for Anna? Again, feel free to raise the hand, or Steve Georgie has a question or comment.
Yeah, my reading of the bill, this precludes electric co-ops that also provide broadband services from this process.
Are you talking about the easement section?
No.
Or the line extension?
Line extension.
Oh, no, this would be open to all types of providers, just like our border-to-border program. Any type of provider would be able to, you know, bid on extending service to these locations.
Steve Fensky has a question or comment.
Good morning. Anna and Tony talked to us about this last week, so it's the same questions that she's already heard. But I guess one comment, I'm curious how effective the reverse auction thing would be if you have really only one provider. And so what's the cost of doing a reverse auction, or, you know, is it worth it? Or is it okay to say, well, you're closest, you know, if you want to do that, that's the one that makes sense. So I have some question about whether that's how useful that is, I guess. The other piece of it is there any cost share interest, you know, to be made, where this is going to be coming out of border-to-border funds, I believe. In a normal course, there would be some kind of cost share, and right now there isn't. So is there kind of an inconsistency in our policy of saying, well, you're going to get money, you're going to own the infrastructure in the end, with border to border, but not necessarily with this one. So,
thanks, Steve. Those are good questions, and I think we see this maybe in the first year as a little bit of an experiment. We don't know how many bids, right, are going to come in for each of these locations, and that was intended to keep the cost down for the state, right? We want to we want to be good stewards of taxpayer money and make sure that we're getting the best value for our money. But yeah, the first year will be a little bit of an experiment, but I guess that's sort of the short answer. And the reverse auction, like I said, it's meant to keep costs down. And if Tony, we went through this a little bit with you, like I said last week, but we wanted to give the Office of Broadband as much flexibility as possible. And it's possible that, maybe you only get a couple of bids on these locations. Like you said, it's going to be the provider that probably is closest to the area. But in that process of a reverse auction or of the lowest bid, there's definitely the potential for a partnership between, the household might agree to pay this amount of money and the provider might agree to pay this amount of money. And if it's not a cost-effective use of state resources, like I said, there's language on line 2.28 that directs the Office of Broadband to take all that into consideration. So hopefully that's helpful, and I'll let Tony add anything too.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and task force members. Tony Mendoza, I'm outside counsel to the Cable Association. I'll just add, there's really two purposes to the reverse auction. One Anna mentioned, which is, we want this to be as cost-effective program as possible. And so that reverse auction allows for that provider to essentially bid on how much subsidy should be provided for a particular line extension project. But the second purpose is if there are multiple providers that are within reach of that particular customer, it does set up the possibility for a competitive, more of a competitive bidding process. And we think, that can only be a good thing, again, for the purposes of making this program as cost affordable as possible. I agree also with Anna in terms of, the cost sharing. There's nothing in this program that precludes a provider making an application or a bid that includes a cost share between the customer, the provider, and the line extension program. And as Anna mentioned, we have tried in this bill to provide OBD as much flexibility as possible in deciding whether something is a cost-effective investment, whether a line extension project is a cost-effective use of state dollars as possible. So there's a lot of discretion given to the office to make sure this money is being used wisely. And I'll just add, this is a line extension bill, and so in terms of cost sharing with, the question about cost sharing again, the provider will already have made a substantial private, 100% private investment to get that line to where it's at today. The line extension really just kind of allows for that last mile, if you will, to hook that customer up when there may be particular circumstances, like Anna mentioned, a driveway or a setback or something like that that makes it cost prohibitive still, even though that line is currently in the area. So I would argue there already is a cost share to get the plant to where it's at, and this is just what's the remaining element or increment of financing that's needed to finish the connection to that customer.
Mark Johnson has a question.
Yeah, hi, good morning. So I have probably a number of questions, but I'll try to stick to a couple specific ones. I understand hearing, the cost sharing and hearing some of that information. But I have a concern. The border-to-border program has a specific match, right? Requirement. In other words, there's sort of a forced in that program sharing, so that 100% of the cost grant can't go to, a provider. There has to be some incentive, the state money. There has to be some incentive for the provider to provide some of their own, or to come up with a public-private partnership, that funds the remaining of it. Whereas I don't see that in this case. And I understand there's an investment that was made to get the line to where it is, but even under the border-to-border program, there's investment that's been made by the providers to get the service to where they have it. And oftentimes those grants are extensions, of those services. So curious why there isn't, or if it wouldn't be better if there were, a minimum sort of a match. A reverse auction might incentivize, if there's a number of providers, for them to come in and say, well, I can, let's name that tune, right? I can do it for 30%, I can do it for 20%, I can do it for, whatever. But I'm concerned that a lot of these cases, there's only one provider, and that there's not going to be that incentive. So then I do the math and I say, $25,000 is a lot, and it's not going to cost that much, to get to every person, of course. But if you do the math on that, you say 35 million, which is in the current border-to-border program, divided by 25,000, that serves 1,400 locations, which is less than 0.5% of the underserved group right now. So, I did that math and I tried to reconcile that in my mind. And then I did a little bit more thinking about cost and thinking this is going to add significant time and effort to the Office of Broadband in terms of what they have to do, and there's no cost built in to deal with that. So I'm looking at it, and I come from the world of education where we get really worried about unfunded mandates, right? Where we have to do this, but we don't get any funding to do it, and then that funding has to come from somewhere. So this funding has to come then from what funding the Office of Broadband already has. So those are just some of my concerns. I'm curious.
Thanks, Mark. Those are really thoughtful comments. Just one thing, I know we've already discussed the match, but we struggle with the match even within our current border-to-border program, right? That's been a topic of conversation definitely around the legislature for a while now, because we know at some point, we don't know what magical point, the 50% match requirement is going to be a struggle to get to some of these last households. And so, but yet we still don't know what the next magical match number would be either. So that's, again, why we were intentional about giving the Office of Broadband flexibility here and recognizing that this is not meant to replace the border-to-border program. I want to be really clear about that, because this is meant to be a complement to it and address totally different situations, right? So we're not thinking that this would be the answer to getting to the last 240,000 households, right? This is meant to address the ones that the larger scale builds will, frankly, they'll leave behind, right? Because they're not going to. And these are going to be more expensive than those projects because those are larger scale. These are households sitting out there kind of on an island, honestly. So those are going to cost more. And, if there's a lot of interest in this program, again, who knows what number of households this could someday fund, but the first round is going to be an experiment. And again, not trying to replace, but trying to create another tool at getting at the same problem, but in different ways.
Can I do a follow-up real quick,
Yeah.
Teddy? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Just a follow-up on that because that made me think, Anna, when you talk about it being an experiment, and I understand that, and don't get me wrong, I'm not against this as an idea. I think we need to be thinking about ways to reach those people that you're thinking about reaching. So I certainly, don't get me wrong. Just some concerns, right, with how it's done. But perhaps we ought to look at, if we're going to think about this as some kind of as an experiment, which it is, to test the waters and see what the rate. Put a cap on the amount of funding. Again, we have caps on the border-to-border program, which I like you say, that magic number on the match. I get that completely, because that's been an issue for us. So has the cap, right? The cap's been an issue for us too, and we understand that. But sometimes that's necessary, and when we had low amounts of funding, the cap was necessary to to provide geographic distribution, right? So in this case, with a new program, maybe it needs a cap like the border-to-border program has, even if that should be modified, which maybe it should be. But maybe this needs that kind of a cap too. Just something to think about.
Yeah, I think we're open to that conversation. I think we're also open to having that conversation with Angie at the Office of Broadband, because and to be thoughtful about this program too. And back to your question too, and that's a question for Angie. We've talked to her about how much a program to administer, and so I don't want to, maybe she wants to answer that. We certainly don't want to create problems for them, but we also want to get at the same issue. So
thank you for that, Anna and Mark. Good questions. for the office, we're still working through some of the cost scenarios here in terms of administering this type of program. But administratively, I don't think it will be that big of a lift for us overall, if we put it together in the right way. Stay tuned. I don't have the numbers for you yet. That's my short answer. But.
Steve Fensky has a follow-up.
Yeah, on the match, I'm not necessarily saying it's got to be 50%, but what if it's 10? What if it's 20? Just something to put in some provider investment. There's still a big incentive there. And then Tony mentioned that the line that's existing that is to be extended would have been 100% funded by the ISP. But Tony, isn't it possible that line that's being extended could have been given state or federal money? So isn't it possible they already did receive a broadband grant or one of the federal programs to get to where they are now?
Yeah, no, that's certainly possible, Steve.
Okay. Well, and that's what I'm saying. Some of these are, they're not necessarily 100% provider funded. Some will, I get that. But overall, just anytime we're going to use this money, is there a try-it number? Is there interest at 20% match? And if there is, well, we're saving something on the state side.
Teresa?
Hi, I just had a couple comments. As an ISP, which is an internet service provider, these line extensions make sense. I think this is a really good solution. And we're saying experiment, but there is another state that is doing this, and we're kind of mirroring Indiana's. And so far, from what I've seen, it looks like it's been successful with their steps and their approval process. So I think we give it a go. And as long as OBD is on board, I think this is a good solution. Thank you.
Teresa. Steve Georgie.
So I guess I'm somewhat confused. There seems to be a conflict in here because the process starts with the resident notifying either via email, some form, or in paper, OBD or deed that they don't have any service. Now, as a prime example, any resident in northern Minnesota that lives along County Highway 25 does not have access to a Mediacom or a Comcast, a cable provider, because it's a very rural area. But in the ditch along County 25, there's middle mile fiber from the Northeast Service Co-op, CTC has access to that, and Paul Bunyan, another service provider. So I indicate I don't have service. And then the list from the OBD goes back to the providers, and Paul Bunyan says, yeah, they do. It's in the ditch. So, how do we get beyond that?
No, that's a really practical question. So the way we envisioned it is the providers would get a list of the addresses, and then they would have to have internet service. So just because the fiber runs by them doesn't mean that they have service, right? We wouldn't run into this issue all the time. So they would have to have service to their home, their location, and then the Office of Broadband, if they have service, would notify the household that they can actually get service to their household. So it doesn't mean that there's just fiber running by, because that's the whole issue, right? The issue is that the fiber doesn't go from there to their home, or there's not a drop, right? So unless they're getting service to their household or their business, they would be eligible, right? Does that make sense?
Well,
this is the issue that it's trying to solve. It's someone who sees the fiber going down their road, but they're like, I don't have service.
Well, right, but yeah. If you contact Paul Bunyan or CTC, they'll say, here's what it costs. It's $5,000 for us to run this down your road. So they do have access. It's just the cost that's prohibitive. Exactly. So now we're going to provide a program that allows the provider, Office of Broadband, no, it's actually a $3,000 connection.
Oh, I see. You're looking for the number.
Like, this is a handout to the connection. I just.
Mr. Could I chime in there to answer that question?
Go ahead, Tony.
It's not a bid up to $25,000. The reason we refer to it as a reverse auction is because it's a bid for the lowest amount of state subsidy. So what that provider would do is bid. First of all, the Office of Broadband would determine whether that customer is indeed able to get service or not. That's a threshold question that would be answered by the Office of Broadband Development. If the answer to that question is no, then that address goes on the list of addresses that can be bid on. So it's not just a hand out to up to $25,000 of subsidy. It's a reverse auction for the lowest amount of subsidy to provide that service. And so that provider is going to have to provide an estimate of what the cost of that service is and how much they expect or want to bid in terms of state help to help meet that cost. And then OBD would sign a contract with that provider to provide that service. So I just want to be clear, this is not up to $25,000, and that's not the way the bidding process would work. It would work to try to provide service, whatever the cost of that service is, along with the lowest amount of state subsidy possible to complete that connection.
I certainly understand the reverse auction mechanism, but how on earth is the Office of Broadband going to make determinations on 1,200 applications? And again, up here where we live with bedrock and those types of geographical challenges, I just think this is an incredible burden for the 5 or 7 people in that office.
So on lines 2.1 to 2.4 there's also a process in which a broadband provider can also notify the department of an address where it is, they have service too. So there's sort of a double check there.
The question I have is, is the draft envisioning that the grants that would be issued through this subject to the technology, scalability, and speed requirements under the existing border-to-border program? And I'm also curious about how it addresses satellite providers, given that, and fixed wireless. Is the wire line meant to preclude that?
No, that's a great question, and you're not the first person who's asked me that too, so I'm ready. The definitions and stats this new program. So we incorporated those entirely. As for scalability, again, that language on 2.28 talks about a wise use of those lines. I can't imagine the Office of Broadband funding something that wasn't scalable, because that would not be, a cost-efficient use of state resources. So they have the flexibility to take a look at what's being proposed there and make good decisions. So as for satellite, this is a line extension program. Since satellite doesn't have lines, we really didn't, see that as an issue. I did get asked about fixed wireless. That one was just practically, I couldn't quite wrap my mind around, because I can't envision a scenario again where we would build a fixed wireless tower to serve like 1 or 2 customers. So I'm not sure that practically that would come up, but the Office of Broadband has dealt with fixed wireless applicants before, right, and funded backhaul. That's what they've funded in the past. So again, I wouldn't imagine them treating it any differently. That was our thoughts on that. Does that help?
Okay, and one last question from Yvonne. Go ahead, Yvonne.
Yeah, I was just wondering, and again, thanks for the presentation. I love fill the gap kinds of things. I think keeping things simple is good to get them to actually happen. So I think that's a good thing. What I'm wondering is your thought process about the having the Office of Broadband do the determination and the notification to the customers. If the providers are receiving the email addresses, if they know that the person, they can look it up in their records, do they have service or not? Couldn't they notify the customer, you've got service? Hey, by the way, here's a marketing opportunity. And it's basically a marketing list in one sense, because you're going to get a bunch of people who already have service that the provider could reach out to. And then it takes that burden off the OBD, you know, have the providers be the ones who notify them that they've got service. And if they don't, then take the action. It's just a thought, and I want to see what your thinking was about that.
We're certainly happy to talk to the Office of Broadband if that was to be something that was burdensome to them, because you're right, more than likely, you know, we would want to follow up with that customer too if we know that they want service and they have it. The other piece that we added in there that we thought would be thoughtful is that it also has the office include in that information around programs in terms of like affordability and those types of options, because that might be maybe the barrier that's causing them not to have access to. And sometimes, honestly, that information is better coming from a third party that's not a provider, right? We all get marketing materials all the time, and people trust the Office of Broadband for good reason, right? They've done a really good job. So, but I'm happy to think more about that. Thank you.
All right. Well, Anna and Tony, thank you so much for presentation. Good engagement from the team. So hopefully you got some good feedback from the task force members as well. And always welcome to be on the task force meetings. And if you have future presentations, happy to hear more about this as well. So thank you for your time and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so team, let's take a break. It's 11:02 now. I think we have a little bit further time later. So let's take a 13-minute break. We'll be back at 11:15 a.m.